and to guide you through our thinking. And there's quite a tough demand on us this afternoon within the series on the future of work in the Global South. We have quite a key topic to engage with this afternoon in our roundtable number 5, inequality in the labor market, with the stated objective being to understand to what extent structural inequalities embedded in sub-Saharan Africa affect the ability of workers and the economic structure to absorb and implement technological change. The way we're going to tackle this is in 2 parts, really. The first part, we have an esteemed panel who are going to each take around about 20 minutes to address some tough issues that we're going to put to them, and then we're going to open up to engage and to push on what we hear and to try and consolidate a little. So our panel, I'll just briefly introduce our panel right now, and then before they speak, I'll say a little bit more about them, just to break up the proceedings a bit. So we have Epo Boniface Nga. He's an associate professor in the Faculty of Economics and Management of the University of Yaoundé. Thank you very much for being with us today. We have Joseph Gataju, who's an associate professor at the Economics Department of the University of Pretoria. Thank you too, Joseph, for being with us. And then AERC's very own Dr. Diana Ngui Muchai, who's the research manager at AERC. So we're very grateful to our panel. And let me make 1 or 2 comments by way of setting the scene, and then I'll pass over to our panelists and engage with them. So a key issue, this series of dialogues really wants to get stuck into the Global South and into Africa in particular. And it's crucial, because otherwise there are these huge debates about the future of work and the 4th Industrial Revolution and artificial intelligence and how they're completely disrupting the world. But they're playing out in the global north. And the analysis is on the global north. And that's expected somehow. We're used to this coming from the continent. Somehow that's expected to translate into something concrete enough for us to respond to and to proactively respond to. But why would it? Because it doesn't necessarily play out like that in the global south as it is in the global north, and not in our African contexts either. And so this is a hugely hot issue. And in some senses, the burden of history and the history of development economics, people live under the assumption that our worker skills and our institutions will be able to rapidly adapt to new conditions, fueling economic growth and net job creation. So in other words, we are supposed to be benefits of being latecomers to the development process, and we can leverage that. On the other hand, this debate about technology is a very depressing one. Like, we've got no space and no degrees of freedom to do policy things, to do development policy, to respond constructively and to be proactive agents in this globalizing world. So either we're told, oh, it's going to be easy, we'll be able to respond, or we're told we're doomed, we must just sit back and respond. And that's just not helpful. And the history of technological innovation and jobs in the Global South tells a different story, and it's a complex story, where sometimes we can do technological adoption, adaptation, but sometimes we haven't done very well at all. And the nature of work, we've been responsive in how we respond, and therefore the nature of work has been rather precarious and an appendage to the development of the global north. And that's just not how we want to respond to this new phase, to the fourth phase, if you like, the fourth industrial revolution. But it's a huge seismic change. And so it's completely appropriate that this afternoon we hone in on the future of work in particular, and the labor market in the African inequality, because that's where this all gets mediated. And so all of our development policies about producing a productive, healthy, well-educated nation gets its return in the labor market when our people do productive work, earn decent incomes, move ahead. That's what development is. But it doesn't happen that easily. And certainly the African labor markets are central in the broader discussion of African inequality. So what we're discussing today is going to be central in what drives African inequality going forward through the rest of the century. And it's a big deal for world inequality too. But it's a big deal in every single country context, but it's a big deal for world inequality because the demography is such that the African economically active population is going to dominate the global share of the working age. The rest of the world are aging out of the working age into the elderly. Our youth bulge is moving into the economically active ages. And so in some senses, if you read the major texts on inequality and what's been driving global inequality, it's been dynamics in China and India up until now. But that's largely because of their population sizes. And Africa is the new, sub-Saharan Africa is the new China and India going through to the end of the century. And as we've already seen in some of the sessions of the series, that means to turn this demography into a demographic dividend is going to turn on what happens in the labor market. So that brings us to our narrow topic today about inequality in our labor market panel. So over the last decade, we have actually produced a lot of evidence and a lot of research in the global South and especially in the African context about the future of work, about what's actually happening and understanding what's happening as the basis for a discussion of the future of work. Not sort of some extrapolation based on some really good work that's done in the global North. What is actually happening in our contexts? And it's time to take stock and to systematize. And it's not just time in an academic sense. It's a crucial time in order to respond properly, not just to be an adjustment or we need to respond in a negative way. Or it's crucial that we think about this and fashion our responses. So thank you for those opportunity to make those opening statements. I hope I was raising the bar on what we're expecting from our panelists. So let's then move to our panelists. And as I said, each will talk around 20 minutes. I will shape that discussion a bit with some questions to the panelists. Let us start then with Professor Ipho Boniface Nga. As I told you, he's an associate professor in the Faculty of Economics and Management at the University of Yaoundé, with his particular, an expert in development economics. And he's received an African Public Policy Award in 2009. He's received many awards. And he's done a lot of completely relevant research to what we're thinking about this afternoon, publishing in really good journals. So exactly the type of African input that we're looking for this afternoon. And we're more interested in hearing from the professor than we are about. We celebrate you. Having said that, though, I'm going to kick off my engagement with you. Can you hear me, Professor Nga?
Good morning to everyone. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. I can indeed hear you.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. So let's start off perhaps by asking you about giving us some sense of the so-called digital divide. What is its magnitude and what is it? How is it explained? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, for giving me the floor to talk about the issue of the magnitude of digital divide, how it is explained, and secondly, who are the most vulnerable groups in terms of access to technological equipment and skills. But please, first of all, permit me to thank the organizers for inviting me to participate in this panel on inequality and labor market. I am deeply honored and grateful for taking part in this discussion. Now, on the issue raised about the magnitude of digital divide and how it is explained, we all know that since the 90s, the concept of digital divide, hetero distinguishing those who have and those who don't have access to information and communication technology, has evolved from issues of gaps in access to encompass issues of what? Of internet access and usage. So beyond just accessing internet and software, there is the issue of use. So according to the OECD, this division is between individuals and households having different socioeconomic levels regarding information and communication technology. It's very important, hinging argument, access and use. Furthermore, there is recently a gaining momentum in aspects linked to closing the digital divide, where there is focus on net benefits associated with the impact of a spreading digital economy. Now, to better appraise or to better analyze the digital divide, we need to evoke the idea of digital divide inequality. These analysis of the digital divide inequality should hinge on two important inequality perspectives. There is the individualistic and the relational conceptions of social inequality. The first, regarding the individualistic conception, departs from what is perceived as methodological individualism. We can cite the paper by Wellman and Berowski, 1998. And here, digital access to information and communication technology relates to the individual's characteristics. We talk about age, gender, etc. In addition to this, to better understand the issue of digital divide, we need to evoke or to convoke the second approach or the second dimension of inequality, which is the relational conception of social inequality. And here, the primary area of interest are the positions of individuals and the relationship between them. Here, inequality is not primarily a matter of individuals, but a category that is, it is due to attributes of categories of differences between people. We can talk about gender in a more global sense, that is men versus women, the youth versus the old. We can talk about minorities versus elites, kind of ethnic corporations or societies that have harnessed the society. So having these two ideas of inequality, that's the social, the relational conceptions, and as well as the individual conceptions. It is important thereon, secondly, in addition to these two forms of inequality, to understand the levels of divide. Because there are two levels of digital divide. And recent analysis, that's papers by Atewal Dimayo, have moved from the first level digital divide to a second level digital divide. Whereas the first level of digital divide, as I earlier indicated, is that of access to computer and internet. And the second level of digital divide is focusing on users' profile of new technologies, with more and more. It's very important now for researchers to examine and view how issues such as content opportunities, frequent access to internet, faster connection, more opportunities, gains in technology skills, and time spent to harness dividends of these technological benefits are done. So, having the idea in mind, we should note two things. First, we are observing that gender, age, race, income, and educational digital divides have lessened compared to the past. I'm going to give some figures later on. And we are shifting more to connectivity issues and to what is perceived as the knowledge divide. Here, knowledge divide, as per the digital divide, if you can put it, concerns technology presents the possibility where gaps move beyond access and having the resource to connect to interpreting, this is very important, interpreting and understanding information presented once they are connected. So it brings the complexity and the dynamism in trying to better understand and pursue of the magnitude, trying to look at the magnitude of digital divide. I'm going to cite some statistics. For instance, if we go by the 2019 and 2020 reports by the International Telecommunications Union, we observe that this divide is peculiar, with Africa lagging behind in almost all dimensions. Let's begin by looking at the number of internet users. Between 2005 and 2019, the number of internet users increased from 51% to 86% in the developed world. It increased from 8% to 47% in the developing world. And for Africa, it increased from 2 to 28%. So despite all regions reporting some form of increase in Africa is still lagging behind. We also observed from this report that countries with the highest population of people not using internet are mostly in Africa and in South Asia. Now, a second key element in appreciating the digital divide is the worldwide broadband subscription. And we observed that between 2007 and 2019, fixed broadband increased, doubling in the developed world, quadrupling in the developing world. But for Africa in particular, it increased from 0.1 to 0.4%. For mobile subscriptions, it's a different story altogether, with Africa recording an increase from 0.2 to 34%. But this is still behind the developed world, which increased from 19 to 121%. And for the developing world, it increased from 1 to 75%. Thereon, the third indicator which we use to appreciate the divide it's the international bandwidth usage per region. And just taking 2019, we observed that for the developed world, the bandwidth usage per internet user, that's kilobytes, was about 189% for the developed world, 91% for the developing world, and just 31% for Africa. So with just 31 kilobytes per second per internet user, this is less than about 10 times far short of what's in Europe, because Europe posted the highest bandwidth usage per internet user, which was about 211 kilobytes per second. Now, two last key indicators when we want to better appraise this digital divide are mobile cellular subscriptions. So we know that in 2020, 44% of the population coverage used 4G, which is one step less than the 5G, compared to 97% in the developed world and 82% in the developing world. In Africa, we observe the biggest gap of population coverage by type of mobile, with just 23% of the population, rather, not having access to mobile network in 2007. This begins to transcribe difficulties where we can append them in terms of job opportunities, new skills, new technology, new acquisition of know-how, because once you have a very low internet network coverage and band, and about 23% of the population not at all having access to internet, it's translating the difficulty or the uphill task Africa needs to undertake to bridge the digital divide. And a last point, that the spatial analysis in terms of the magnitude of the divide, it's looking at the rural-urban disparity as per internet and as per access to computer. Two figures. First, in the developed world, that's in 2019, comparing urban versus rural access to internet, in the developed world, urban areas have 87% and rural areas 81% access to internet. Taking the developing world as a whole, urban areas have 65% against 28% for rural areas. But looking at Africa, we observe that just 28% of households in urban areas had access to internet, and in rural areas, it was just 6%. The same story goes with access to computer, with Africa reporting that urban areas have household in urban areas, just 17% of households in urban areas have an access to computer, and just 2% in rural areas. So the key takeaway is that indicated Africa is lagging behind as per digital divide in accounting when it's having a digital divide inequality concept and looking at some figures. I am then going to answer the second phase of the first question, which is how this magnitude, or what explains the magnitude of the digital divide as indicated by figures and data purported by the International Telecommunications Union, the World Bank, and the African Development Bank. Now, several causes explain the magnitude of this divide. But nonetheless, recent survey by international organization suggests two key issues that explain this magnitude that are considered as very important. The first is literacy and skills, and the second is affordability. So literacy and skills as per ICT, knowledge acquisition, and affordability appear to be the two top barriers in accessing
Is it just me that can't hear the professor? You can just nod your head or whatever.
No, it's all of us.
I can't hear you, Martin.
No. Okay. Well,
The digital divide.
He's making a point about digital infrastructure, right? Yeah.
He's illustrating his point.
yes.
hello.
Yes,
Thank
there
you.
we go.
Sorry,
You're back.
the network connection issue. As I was saying, I was on the issue of lack of ICT skills as a significant barrier in terms of in accounting or explaining for the digital divide market. And I was quoting a study which suggested by the National Telecommunication Union that between 2014 and 2018, in 40 out of 84 countries for which data was available, less than half of the population possessed basic computer skills, such as copying a file, sending an email with an attachment. And for more complex activities, such as basic arithmetic formula in a spreadsheet or downloading and installing new software, this proportion was even lower. In 60 of the countries, that's of 84 countries of which data were available, this proportion was less than 50%. This is just pointing to the glaring gap or setbacks for which lack of ICT skills affect the widening gap of digital magnitude, with consequences on employability, employment opportunities, welfare opportunities, skills, accessing key industries like software development or information and technology sectors, and should be one of the key focus if we are trying in the global south to amend this. Regarding affordability, it can be perceived on several fronts. We all know in 2018, the United Nations Broadband Commission for Sustainable Development set as target for 2025 that the entry level for broadband services should be made affordable in developing countries. This was an objective set by the UN, and it should correspond to 2% of the monthly gross national income per capita of the said country. Unfortunately, as it currently stands, the average cost of mobile data basket of about 1.5 gigabytes in developing countries is considerably above this target. On affordability, the 2020 annual meeting of the World Bank focused on the issue of closing the digital divide. On affordability, and in view of accessing the digital sphere, the participants concurred that, first, lack of infrastructure was a major barrier to connectivity in Africa. And second, there was need for a greater collaboration between the public and private sectors to construct frameworks that close the digital divide via infrastructure needed to build the connectivity gap. So, one of the main takeaways from the 2020 World Bank and IMF annual conference on closing the digital divide was focus on cooperation and not competition between the private and the public sector to foster the development of this sector. Indeed, developing ICT skills contribute towards engaging on the idea that technology alone, this is important, technology alone cannot establish connectivity for everyone, but that there is need to develop a robust digital ecosystem to attenuate the digital divide. And in this digital system, focus should be on investing in developing digital skills of underserved populations or minorities, as well as women or girls, that are excluded from the digital development opportunities. So the ecosystem should come in place, which maps out possible cooperation between the public and private sector, each contributing towards resolving the affordability issues as ICT infrastructure, etc., but also education and empowering the underserved people. Other possible non-exhaustive issues that may hamper digital closure are the following. We observe a third key issue, from my opinion, which is the idea of culture. There is a claim that the language, the image, and the language needed to convey the message should be such that those participating may adequately perceive. I backed this with a survey in 2013 that was conducted by the Pew Research Center, which noted that participants taking a survey in Spanish, this was in the US, were nearly twice as likely to use the internet. So now I was asked to talk about, in addition to the causes of the divide and the magnitude, to look at three key issues: the role of gender divide, the role of age divide, and the role of race and ethnic divides. Regarding the gender divide, we all note that addressing the mobile gender gap is an important way to contribute to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Despite, and the moderator raised it, despite the effectiveness of digital technologies to provide leapfrog opportunities for women and thus enhance their economic and political empowerment and enhance their labor market perspective and employability issues, the digital gender divide is persistent in sub-Saharan Africa, particular, and developing countries. The 2018 OECD report on bridging the gender divide indicated that growth in internet access has been remarkable in low and middle income countries, where about 2.9 billion people now access the internet on their mobile phones. Across the developing countries, mobile is the primary way most people access internet, with mobile broadband connection comprising about 87% of total broadband connections. However, this is the downside, mobile access and use, that's the first level divide, and the second level of digital divide remains unequal, where women are still 8% less likely than men to own a mobile phone, 20% less likely to use internet on a mobile phone. This means that in these markets, 300 million fewer women than men use mobile internet. And the key barrier is owning a mobile phone. We could also indicate that the gender gap is widest in Southeast Asia, with about 51%, and in Sub-Saharan Africa with about 37%. In 2019, for instance, the proportion of women using internet globally was 48%, compared to 58% for men. In relative terms, this means that the global internet gap is 17% as per gender. And between 2013 and 2019, the gender gap in terms of digital divide has been increasing in Africa. Two statistics to support the gender divide. In 2019 and 2020, internet penetration was 86% for men and 81% for women in the developed world. In Africa, it was 37% for men and 20% for women. Over this time, the increase, the gap has remained fairly persistent in the last 10 years. And this marks how bad Africa is when looking at the Internet Parity Score. That's looking at the Internet Parity Score between 2013 and 2019. That of Africa fell from 0.79 in 2013 to 0.5 in 2019, indicating that in terms of trying to par or internet parity by gender, Africa still lags behind. And the divide affects more women than men. So indeed,
Boniface, can we, maybe we can you wrap up?
Yes, thank you. Now, by age, it's fairly, there's not much information by age and by ethnic, calling to the idea to further investigate this. Wrapping up on the second part of my intervention, which is the most vulnerable groups in terms of access to technological equipment and skills. Overall, we can identify five key vulnerable groups. The first is obviously gender, which I just spoke, that women. The second group, which in my view is very important, are a segment of young people in the labor market, which is young people not in education, employment, or training. That's the next. And it is very important to focus on this vulnerable group because the ensuing consequences in terms of employability and overarching welfare and governmental spending on the issue is very important. There is also people in conflict or war situations, because generally in fragile and post-conflict countries, the rate of increase in technological equipment and skills, ICT skills, is fairly low compared to their non-conflict and free counterparts. And the third and last group of people which they are highly affected and they're vulnerable groups are the disabled. It is very important to require special attention as per the disabled in terms of access, take-up, and exploit of benefits to this digital ecosystem, which I did mention before. So, public-private corporations should develop equipment and skills that should help exclusion of the impairment and eliminate existing barriers, as well as prevent new ones as per this particular group of people. So concluding, Mr. Chair, I would like to indicate that issues of digital divide, magnitude, drivers, and inclusion in terms of technology and skills are undeniable in an evident and undeniable manner, pose opportunities in terms of labor, in terms of welfare, in terms of gender, in terms of age dividends, in terms of ethnic inequality, because as we observe, spatial ethnic disparities mimic digital divide, and should be scrutinized with robust research in order to better inform the global south in general and policymakers on how to address these issues, aim at bridging the gap and optimizing or reaping net benefits from the digital economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, indeed. And so that's a very useful context setting and daunting in the sense that these categorical or horizontal inequalities of the digital divide map onto the existing inequalities that we have in our African societies. So that's daunting as a context. But let's push on then a little bit into what the forces are coming into our African economies, and we're going to ask Professor Joseph Gatachew to do this for us. He, as I said, he's an associate professor in economics at the University of Pretoria. He's a rated researcher in the South African rating system, a highly rated researcher, and he's won many research prizes and published in great journals. So no pressure, Professor. But we're expecting a lot of wisdom from you this afternoon. And let me kick off, though, in then pushing on from that basis that we were given in the first talk to think about the effect of the technological gaps on Africa's ability to absorb emerging technology. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Murray, for the generous introduction. Thank you very much for ARC and all the audience. Thank you for being here, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity. I hope you hear me. So let me continue. Well, I would like to start with certain concepts. I think the problem, this problem will be understood with understanding certain popular concepts, especially among growth economists, what we refer the catch-up and convergence hypothesis. And I would like to talk about that because yesterday, Rauf, he was talking about some African policymakers, how they talk about leapfrogging using artificial intelligence. So it looks like a little bit this idea. I would like to talk about it is because I don't think it's easy as people think about talk about that. There is a huge literature. Most of them are from the 90s and 2000s that concern itself with whether there is a catch-up or absolute convergence or conditional convergence between poor and rich countries. And more importantly, this literature is also concerned on what determines convergence or catch-up. As you are going to see, this is very much related to technology transfer, technology adoption, and assimilation, especially in the South, the global South, particularly in Africa. The basic idea of catch-up first came from the work of a Russian-born American economist, Alexander Gerschenkron, in the 90s, in the 60s, sorry. Gerschenkron, in his book, Economic Backwardness in a Historical Perspective, in 1962, it's a very popular book with more than 30,000 citations. The time when this work came, it was the time many African economists gained independence, and development economics was a very popular topic at that time. So Gerschenkron, in his work, he hypothesized the advantage of relative backwardness. Gerschenkron's idea was that there is a backlog of knowledge and technologies created by early leaders that can be exploited by laggard countries, poor countries in Africa and also in South Asia could grow faster than rich countries in the West by bringing the backlog of unexploited technology, which is expensively, which is created with a lot of resources. They could get that cheap at relatively cheaper price. That's his basic idea. Gerschenkron's idea, his name is a bit difficult. It's like Getachew by name. Gerschenkron's idea, to our surprise, to your surprise, is even shared by modern time prominent economists such as Robert Lucas. He's a 1995 Nobel Prize winner. Particularly Lucas, in his 2000 paper titled Some Macroeconomics for the 21st Century, is a very nice, easy read without, with no techniques involved. He talks about there how new opportunities are open to poor countries with an increase the stock of the world knowledge increase. Lucas, he argued that knowledge produced anywhere could benefit producer everywhere. So he even predicted near convergence of income between nations at the end of the 21st century. And he even reminded his future readers to remember his prophecy. He said, remember who told you that, like 50, 60, 70 years back. So he did that. And now the question, of course, is that has absolute convergence really happened? So we have to ask the data. The data says no. Many of the empirical literature have done following this literature. They claim convergence in per capita income of a set of developed countries with, using long-term data like for the 200 years, 170 years. So, a set of developed countries were able to catch up each other. For instance, countries like Canada, Japan, Russia, they were able to catch up the United Kingdom. And they also, if you look at a little bit shorter data, like since 1960s, for the world as a whole, there is divergence. Many African countries are diverging rather than converging. But a set of East Asian countries, they are converging. Of course, since the mid since the mid of 95, some African countries, Africa on average, they start growing faster, but still much below than anticipated by the proponents of the catch-up and convergence hypothesis. Now the question is, why the two do not catch up? Often three reasons are provided in the literature. One of them is existence of technological barriers. Economists like Parent and Prescott, I think one of them is a Nobel Prize winner. I'm not sure, but I have to check. So argue that institutional and technological barriers such as legal constraints, corruption, violence, threat of violence, workers' strike, could stop countries from realizing the advantage of relative backwardness. The second reason is lack of social or local capability or absorptive capacity in poor African countries, which this could obstacle them to exploit existing technologies. The third one is the fact that, this is my favorite actually, the fact that technological knowledge is not always a public good as Lucas or others assume. Most technological knowledge are actually private goods for two reasons. First, technological knowledge have cumulative and tacit character. Applying a given knowledge requires special efforts from the receiver side. It requires previous knowledge and skills. We can't indulge in nuclear physics because we have access to the material. We have to learn calculus first. The second is that technological knowledge are not really freely available, as they are protected by patents, copyrights, etc. A good example is actually the COVID vaccine. It is abundantly available now in certain developed countries, but here in Africa, the demand is there, but we couldn't get it. All these factors have played a role in African economies' inability to absorb emerging technologies and initiate the catch-up process. Low local and regional R&D intensities, high level of corruption, low level of human capital base, poorly developed infrastructure, high level of inequality constitutes the technological barriers, lack of social capability, or an absorptive capacity in our continent. So just to give you, I would like to go a little bit detailing this factor in some of these factors. For instance, with respect to low local and regional R&D intensity, in Africa, there is relatively low commitment to R&D activities. So this one, some of the things also is also mentioned on Boniface also he mentioned, the gap we have, with the developed countries. So, for instance, sub-Saharan Africa regions, R&D activity is the lowest in the world compared to other regions, and both in terms of R&D expenditure and number of researchers engaged in R&D. But just to give you one number, actually, we get a lot of interesting discussion from Boniface and a lot of data actually on the gap. Just to give you one, to add on that one, Sub-Saharan's R&D expenditure, excluding South Africa. We have to exclude South Africa. Okay, the South Africa is a different animal. In this sense, is below 0.3%, which about 800% below the developed country average, and more than 300% below the developing countries average. This is from the UN UNESCO data, based on UNESCO data. Engaging in why this is could hurt Africa, because engaging in local R&D activities could facilitate the assimilation and learning of knowledge. Internal innovative activities not only generate knowledge, not only generate local knowledge, but also could enhance assimilation and exploitation of knowledge generated elsewhere. Okay, I mean, by investing in internal R&D activities, not only African countries invest in the generation of local knowledge, but also they are investing in their capability, local capability and absorptive capacity. Okay? So Africa is also characterized by low level of human capital base that severely affects the region's absorptive capacity. For instance, higher education enrollment rate in almost all sub-Saharan African countries is below 15%, 15%, which is the enrollment rate in 1970s for developed countries. Okay. Sadly, what are sold to the injury is the high level of brain drain in the country, the south-north skilled migration. Okay. I can also just continue a little bit if I have time, which
well, maybe you can channel this. This is a fascinating perspective, and obviously it has implications for wage inequality, right? And maybe you can just say something about that, exactly how we've seen these forces that you're describing, how we've seen them play out in wage inequality.
Yeah, especially I'm going to discuss that. That discussion. It's one of my main points. For instance, one of the things that Africa is known is with poorly developed infrastructure. The majority of Africa live in remote areas with poor transportation and communication facilities to connect to other parts of the world. Because the fact that some knowledge have passive character implies that technological diffusion could diminish with physical distance. Because the knowledge transfer could depend on social interaction. So this has effect in inequality, between at least regional inequality, for instance. So one of the things, another factor which affect countries' ability to absorb African countries to absorb emerging technology is high level of inequality in Africa. Okay, I'm coming to that area slowly. High level of inequality in Africa could also affect negatively the region's ability to absorb emerging technologies. For instance, increasing inequality or high level of inequality is known for its disruption of economic activity by creating social discontent, crime, and political instability. So let me stop here. And then, maybe in the next round will come.
No, that's very useful, and I don't want to rush you. And I think you made some absolutely crucial. Gave us a framework. Really appreciate your growth perspective. It's most useful. But as you say, you can come back again, and you will. I'm hoping. So let's move on then to having looked at the sort of the contextual inequalities in access to in the digital divide, and now Josef's given us a really useful way of thinking about how the global economy actually pulls this through. Why is it important? Why is it? And he's given us some very useful stuff. So let's turn our attention then to what can be done about that. What can be done to close these gaps? And I'm going to ask Dr. Diana Ngui-Muchai to actually help us with that, to kick off that particular discussion. So we're putting 3 prongs on the table for this afternoon. One is the sort of context, and we don't want to, we were given lots of very useful statistics already, and so we think we've got the context. Josef now pushed us into an area that's much more analytic and contentious, and we need lots of input from everybody. And now we're going to take it to the policy terrain, which we also then are very interested in the engagements. Let me just quickly introduce and honor our speaker. So Dr. Diana is the research manager at AERC, so she's from us. She holds a PhD in economics from Germany. And before she joined AERC, she was a senior lecturer in the Department of Econometrics and Statistics at Kenyatta University, and has done many other things too, particularly working in research institutes. So that's going to give you the texture. Worked in Kipra as well, to link this to the policy discussion. So thank you so much, Diana, and over to you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. And I must thank the organizers for seeing it worthy for me to be in this forum. Thank you very much. I can't stress enough what the other panelists have already talked about, the gaps and the inequalities that are there. So I'll dive straight away into how do we close these gaps. And I'll start with one of the solutions. Of course, the panelists, they were talking about them. And one of the things we need to do to close the technology gap is basically increasing digital literacy. Increasing digital literacy. This is something that cuts across all groups, whether the marginalized, somebody.
Pablo, can you just mute, please? Pablo, can you mute?
Reservó la casa 77.
Pablo,
Probably the host can mute them. And this cuts across all groups, whether it's gender, the marginalized, and the age, and all those affected by the digital divide. What do you mean by increasing digital literacy?
El viernes.
What is that? The usage of technology requires a certain standard of literacy, which could lead to the exclusion of the small but the important segment of the society that is illiterate. So we need to increase the digital literacy. On one side, we introduce some ICT syllabuses. Of course, this is one of the policies which we came about, or it was actually introduced during our just concluded regional policy forum on strengthening the COVID-19 policy administrative response in East Africa. And of course, this can be implemented at the earliest levels of learning through tertiary education, adult and community digital literacy education via mobile or resident clinics. So this is one way we can try to increase digital literacy. Of course, in the increase of digital literacy, we also have policies and initiatives that a need to expand digital literacy and digital skills that are, of course, in line with the digital transformation strategy for Africa. While we are increasing the digital literacy, sometimes we have to check across the divide. Whether it is the age, of course, it cannot be uniform across. When we look at the age digital divide, you find that the participants in a particular study by Antonio on bridging the age-based digital divide concluded that they were keen to learn, despite their age, of course, they were keen to learn on how to use digital technologies. And so the policy we make here is to ensure that we develop strategies to teach the digital literacy skills to older adults, particularly those living in the rural and remote areas. And while teaching the older adults, one thing we need to note is that the technology changes very fast. So we also need to encourage them when we are teaching them on how to try to use this technology and not to be intimidated by the change of the technology. The other part which we need to put keen on is the gender. The gender part of it, the government, we tell them to equip the girls with digital skills through prioritizing education in ICT subjects. Just as I have mentioned earlier, they can start from the basic education. And of course, this has to be done in collaboration with other stakeholders so that when it comes to the cost part of it, they chip in very fast. And one of the way of achieving these digital literacies, again, is to provide operational incentives to ICT entities. Of course, as I'm talking about bringing on board other stakeholders, you find that the government cannot just do it alone. So they need to chip in very fast and provide some incentives to these entities so that they are able also to come down and provide the digital technologies within the institutions we are talking about. And a good example is whereby a government institution focuses on teaching SMEs and how to integrate computing into the operations. So basically, a well-wishing government would chip in and of course bring on board the private sector on it. The government chipping in this case, will try to minimize the tax obligations of such institutions. The other way we can do to increase the digital literacy is to develop relevant and local content in addition to the required infrastructure. The previous speaker talked about investing in infrastructure. I can't emphasize enough on that. So in this case, we have to get in touch with individuals and communities and ensure that the content we develop is basically relevant to what we are teaching. And a good example would be a peasant farmer in a particular rural environment. We should be asking ourselves how will investing in various skills associated with digital literacy influence this particular peasant farmer, and what will this farmer have or what do they have to gain from such skills? So when we get to the relevant content and we try to develop that which is good for this particular peasant farmer, you'll find that they might realize ways of boosting their farming, and of course they discover better ways of tendering their crops and so on and so forth. The other issue which we should look at in bridging the digital divide is policies. Our policies are very key in these issues. And one of the things we need to note is that we need to promote inclusive growth and poverty reduction policies to support increased technology adoption, knowledge, and skills. And of course, this one should be emphasized when it comes to the plight of marginalized groups and also underrepresented groups within the society. The other thing we need to note is that we also need to have harmonization of regulatory frameworks. One study noted that when we are having regulatory frameworks, they are not harmonized across, of course, the institutions that are involved and probably across even the regions. We find that when we harmonize the regional or legal and regulatory frameworks on technology, this one can spur research and development, market entry and competition, data privacy and data security. And this one will help in bridging the technology gap. The other thing we also need to note within the policies, it is also going to be specific to gender, specific to the marginalized communities. And when it comes to gender, also you find that we need to develop concrete policy actions that are needed to foster women's and girls' full participation and inclusion in the digital economy. The gender here is where you find that the women are spending quite a lot of time in unpaid childcare and housework. How do we help them to participate fully in digital labor? One way of doing this is to assure that we raise awareness, challenge gender stereotypes and norms, of course, coupled with measures of fostering gender-neutral parental leave taking. Of course, we know some institutions give the women like 3 months. This one is not enough. So we need also to look at the parental leave taking and childcare services provision. And of course, this would help address the norms, attitudes, and behaviors around the childcare. And to find that with such policy, it is going to give the women even more time to ensure that they get time to learn more about the technology. The other way we can do is to facilitate the labor market participation of women as much as we are also monitoring the quality of their job. We have talked about the wage inequality. Of course, it also narrows down to the gender very much. And one way to do this is to have policies that aim to equip female workers with more self-organization, management, and communication. And of course, we encourage women to enroll in some of the related studies like science, technology, engineering, and mathematics studies, and of course, the apprenticeship, so that of course, they'll be at a better position, of course, to close the wage gap. I'll jump quickly to skills in the interest of time. We also have to look at the skills to bridge the technology gap. And one of the ways to bridge the skill gap is to develop a flexible education system, which will be critical to keep pace with the changing technologies. And one question we'll be asking ourselves is, what digital skill strategy are required for developing countries to break out of the digital divide trap? A study by Cherry on bridging the digital divide in the G20 Skills for the New Age recommends various, ways of trying to bridge this digital divide gap. One of the ways is to monitor and the evolving set of digital skills required for employment, incorporate a holistic digital skills development strategy into national education programs. I've already talked about that. And also, other than that, contextualize skilling programs within prevailing social cultural norms. And I would add here that we also need to develop skills tailored to the fourth industrial revolution, so that the expertise of the workforce which we have is aligned to the 21st century markets. And I will not emphasize the importance of having all the stakeholders working together to ensure these skills are developed. And another thing within the skills is to match the supply with demand. Demand with the supply in the labor market through strengthening the ties between general and vocational education. One of the things we have realized is that whatever is in the labor market is not what is taught in the education system. So we need to match the skills so that when people get out there, they are able to match what is in the market. And in this instance, the ICT should be presented as tools to improve system governance, learning objective, and of course, a support tool and a vehicle for increased access to training and job creation. And of course, this one also again boils down to the different marginalized groups which the previous panelists have talked about. And one of the questions we should be asking is, how do we, of course, try to level this divide within the communities? A World Bank conference on digital divide calls to action on behalf of women and girls who are still being left out of the fastest growing and highest paying jobs in technology revolution. And how do we do that? One of the things I want to bring out is the G20 skills strategies. It's available, which of course encompasses building and updating skills for work and inclusive growth, encouraging firms to invest in skills and ensuring that skills are fully used. So basically, when we adapt these national and G20 skills strategies, we'll be able to increase the awareness of the divide and help address some of the stereotypes that come across. The other way is to encourage the G20 economies to consider making some commitments. One of the commitments would be to agree to establish targets for women in the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics courses. They also create fund and grant schemes aimed at enhancing enrollment of the marginalized groups and underrepresented groups in some of the STEM education. The other thing could be establish awards and prizes, enhancing the feasibility of the marginalized groups, and of course, implement awareness campaigns. Because we find that in the digital divide, some of the things, unless we make some of the commitments, will not be able to bridge that gap. I would also talk about data. It's very key in bridging the digital divide. This is because we need evidence-based policy making, which requires the systematic collection of data aimed at identifying priorities and defining and monitoring key lines of actions. Without the appropriate data, we will not be able to foster evidence-based related actions. And as far as bridging the digital divide is concerned, and I would mention a publication of an annual digital gender equality report that is based on common methodologies and indicators and the periodical collection. Of course, the measurement toolkit for the digital economy being prepared for the G20 Digital Economy Task Force by the OECD in conjunction with ITU, that is International Telecommunication Union. This one is very key if we have to bridge the digital divide. I would also talk about, I've mentioned before, collaboration, cooperation, and communal effort is required when it comes to bridging the digital divide. We are talking about governments, public institutions, private entities, of course, as well as individuals, which must take part in the process of eliminating these persistent disparities in our community. And so we need a very strong cooperation across the stakeholders to remove the barriers to girls' and women's full participation, not to mention the marginalized individuals. I've also mentioned, finally, implementation of the existing strategies and recommendations that are out there. I've already mentioned them. We need to go forth. For us to be able to bridge the digital divide, we need to go forth and implement the existing strategies and recommendations. And one of them which I would mention is the recent ESC e-commerce comprehensive assessment, which covers a wide range of important issues, including on the regulatory environment. And this one, of course, you're looking at data security, consumer protection, intellectual property rights, of course, among other things. So the chair, let me stop here for that particular moment, and we shall continue engaging. Thank you very much. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Diana. And I'm sure that there's lots of, you've given us lots of material, both about very specific, about the the role of general development policies and their spillovers, but also very specific focused policies to do with the digital divide in solving inequalities in access for citizens in any context, and also general government policies in general about infrastructure, good infrastructure for everybody as a platform. For example, bandwidth is a great example of that, where in my country, in South Africa, for whatever reason, government has just got far too cute, and they're honing very specific policies that are clever, but they haven't done their job on providing good infrastructure and good bandwidth to enable citizens to actually do as much as they can. And yeah, so thank you. So we've had very good inputs. I think we've got a very good sense of the context and the inequalities that prevail, and this policy discussion in some senses has returned to them, but also made mention then of the platform for citizens to respond to what's going on in the world. And then I think Joseph gave us a really good picture about what are the forces coming into our economies. They're not equalizing forces. And he used a very useful analogy of that we don't have convergence. We don't have, at the beginning I said, you know, there's supposed to be this huge benefit from being a latecomer to development. Well, I think Joseph gave that a lot more texture, and I was cynical about that. And Joseph brought this right home to roost here in our discussion right now, in saying there's not some automatic convergence that's just going to happen. There's actually divergence that's going on, and how can we understand that? And that's the environment for policy making, because that's the prevailing reality. Okay, so now I want to open up. We've got at least half an hour, and then I'd like to give our panelists a chance to come back and just summarize the key learnings that they have from this event, from the input. We already have one or two comments. So in the comment box, I wonder if people don't want to actually just address them. So I'm going to ask, or give people at least an opportunity. Bernadette, do you want to come in and open up the discussion with your point?
Thank you very much. I would like to thank the panelists and yourself for this rich discussion. I have, from the discussion, it appears that we have two main constraints. One on digital literacy, and the other one is on overall literacy. And I gave the example of Cote d'Ivoire, which I know best. And the literacy rate in 2018 was just 47.2. And now we are talking about digital literacy. How to solve these two, you know, together? Should we think about one coming first? So I would like your views on that. Should we put one of the constraints before the other one, or should we work them out together? And my second question is on internet security. The discussion is on, but not much has been said about that. And I would like the views of the panelists on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's a really good first question about, in the context of these discussions, should we be targeting policies that focus on digital literacy or overall literacy? Really, really excellent question. People can think about that. We also have a contribution from Njuguna in the box. Please, why don't you take the floor and just talk to that a bit? Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Mure. I thought I was responding to Bernadette, but now it looks like.
Well, you can. You can.
No, I know. I'm actually joking. I think Bernadette is right. One of the underlying constraints in terms of digital platforms is actually the adoption or the availability of, should I say, physical infrastructure. If you look at my latest works, I have actually argued that we need to provide connectivity across for everyone so that nobody is left behind. Remember, we used, the other day I was asking someone how we can text using the phone very fast. But when we started with the mobile phones, it was not very easy to text. It was so difficult. But right now, it also meant that even in your house, you needed to go to a corner where there will be connectivity. So connectivity is very, very critical. But my main point to Bernadette is that once the government provides the physical infrastructure, then the private sector and individuals will supply the core infrastructure. That is where fintechs are coming in. The fintechs cannot ride on the digital platform if there is no physical infrastructure. They will ride on the physical infrastructure to create the core infrastructure and get to everyone. And that's a very important point. I think Muri even mentioned that the other day I was having some I think it was Harun and so many other people from South Africa. I'm in my rural home and I'm using just my phone as the hotspot. And I didn't get any interaction at all. But it was so difficult. The bandwidth from the other end was so difficult to get. So what is missing here? It is actually physical infrastructure to improve the connectivity. Some countries that have created these fiber optics, and then the network of fiber optics has covered all the country. Then obviously the private sector has come up with very important core infrastructure that actually covers everyone else. That's the point I was trying to make. Thank you very, very much, Muri, for giving me a chance.
Yeah, very useful point. Thank you. I want to just abuse, in a sense, my role as the chair and go to Yusuf to just ask you to feed off what Njabuna's just said, because in a sense, we all agreeing that government must provide a platform, but you also made the strong claim that this technology is private rather than public. And so it's not so if government provides the platform, that's one side of the market, but there's still the, how do we leverage then an appropriate private sector response to that? You're on mute.
Yeah.
You're still on mute.
Okay. I think now. Yeah. Yes. First, I would like to speak about the question you asked me. How technology play a role in wage inequality in Africa. The problem in Africa and also what we can do about it. I think these are very, very important and very, very focused on the topic, on this topic. And the first thing, unfortunately here in Africa, which I'm disappointed, and I'm going to disappoint you on that we don't have a lot of data on wage inequality in Africa. We have a lot of research in South Africa, of course, but we can't use that to infer about Africa. But the general trend in Africa in terms of income, but we have income inequality. We have income data from UNU wider, and we have also this Frederick Holt, a very nice database. So we can, we see, inequality in Africa is quite heterogeneous, depending on the south, west, east, and north. But on average, it's declining in many African countries, a little bit in the 90s, 2000, and also rising in other countries. But the most important thing is that did technology play a role in this? What role the technology plays? Okay, so the first thing is that we all know that technological progress is a primary driver of long-run economic growth. No dispute on that. Many economists agree. But another thing is that economists agree that the benefit from technological growth is not equally shared. That is our concern now. Because this artificial intelligence is coming now. We are in the fourth industrial revolution, as Murray said before. So technology in general tends to create winners and losers. So how that affects Africa? Now we have to look at what technologies are important to Africa. In general, there are technologies that aggravate inequality, that mitigate inequality. Okay, for instance, if you take, there are two types of technologies that aggravate inequality, what we call labor-saving technologies and skill-based technologies. Now the question is that, now labor-saving technologies are technologies that enable firms to produce less labor. These are technologies that substitute labor with capital, and also it can increase or change the income share vis-a-vis the capital share of income in the economy. Okay, so are technologies labor saving in Africa? Now the answer for this is no, maybe not. Okay, but we can't argue on that, maybe not, because in Africa structural transformation is almost non-existent. So if you see, for instance, the share of agriculture still is 55%. Yeah. So so that means if you compare with Latin America, it's less than 15%. It's like 14%. So we are still, the agriculture sector is not automated, but we are jumping to the service sector. I'll go to that. Another question is that another type of technology is skill-based technologies. These are technologies that favor skills, that tend to increase relative productivity of skilled individuals, like managers, entrepreneurs, CEO, more than medium skilled individuals, clerk, salesperson, something like etc. Now there is more or less a general consensus that technological progress is skill-based in developed countries. Because most African countries do not develop their own technologies, but acquire them from the developed countries, technologies in Africa also are believed to be skill-based. Okay. Now, of course, the first speaker, he said a lot of nice things about digital technologies in Africa. Now, these technologies, according to some, there are also technologies that favor equity. These are technologies that require a small or no entry cost, less transaction cost, and economies of scale. Like these are technologies like cell phones, internet to the peripheries, to seem to favorably affect inequality in Africa, because it reaches to the remote, to the rural areas. But still, of course, we have these digital gaps that we have learned to take from the two. This is also, if you see, for instance, Africa's structural transformation is quite non-traditional, that it jumps from agriculture to the service. The service sector is better growing, even although the manufacturing sector is stagnant due to the digital technologies that come into Africa. Okay, so we can also talk about FDI. Maybe I'll discuss that one later, how FDI affects technology transfer through FDI affects inequality in Africa. But let's talk about what can be done to close these gaps. So let's come to the policy that we are all interested, because I see also the time. So the first is that I would like to emphasize, which is also I'm happy also Diana mentioned that one and discussed a lot, that infrastructure investment. For me, the key in Africa is infrastructural investment, because it has so much advantages. I will list some of these advantages. The first thing is that it helps to increase aggregate demand in the short run. For instance, if you see Ethiopia's recent decade-long double-digit growth and other economic success is associated to demand-side growth that involves large public investment. This has its own problems, such as triggering inflation, but the advantage is so much. This is the short term. In the long run, also, infrastructure development is is a driver of long-run economic growth. We know that from the Barrow's 1990 paper, from Asher's 1989 paper. I have also actually we did some good work with Thomas Zisman and Augustin Fossil, and especially we emphasize the relationship between infrastructure and growth is nonlinear, and we estimated the optimal level of public investment. Another important effect of infrastructure is on inequality. So infrastructure, if properly targeted, could help to reduce poverty and inequality. You know, many works, you know, I myself have done some work in this area. For instance, in one of my papers, that I show that the type of public good, productive government investment in expanding may benefit the poor or the rich more than proportionally, depending on the type of the public good. For instance, construction of new dams, irrigation may benefit those who have access to fertilizer and high-yielding variety seeds. On the other hand, infrastructure services such as clean water, sanitation, public transport may benefit the poor, because the poor, they lack these resources. So another interesting effect of infrastructure is that it helps to tackle the brain drain. There is a very interesting paper by Fosu and others in 2004. They focused that the major cause of brain drain in Africa is the lower rate of return to human capital, which in turn caused by low levels of complementarity inputs such as physical capital. Lucas stresses the importance role of complementarity among production factors when he studies the lack of capital flight from rich to poor countries. Therefore, you know, sometimes the issue, our issue, is not about optimal allocation of resources, but optimal sequential investment. Which one to invest first? For instance, is it infrastructure? Is it human capital? So there is also another advantage of infrastructure, but I would like also another one is human capital. Our human capital base is very important to develop our human capital base in order to kick off the absorptive capacity and the local capability, innovative capabilities of African countries. I mentioned, you know, before the work by Verspagen, who talks about the public good nature of the private good nature of knowledge, that you know, some knowledge due to their cumulative nature, they require special effort, knowledge, skill from the receiver side. Therefore, to fully benefit from local and technological transfer, African countries need to develop their absorptive capacity. You know, that one of it is through developing their human capital base. Another important factor probably we need to mention is institutional capacity. We need to develop our institutional capacity. There is a saying that an institution praise technological advancement or economic growth. Okay. If you see technology, infrastructure, we are talking now, these are, you know, we are telling the policymaker to focus on this, but these things, they are by themselves, they are economic growth, they are development. They are not the driver of the development. You know, some people argue, but they are development by themselves. So we have to develop institutions like securing property rights, you know, institutions that reduce transaction cost, so that creates conducive competitive environment and trust in the economy. Another, yes, okay.
Maybe we should.
Okay.
Very nice input, and I do think that we, you know, I don't want to reach too quickly for a consensus, but I do think that the way you framed that point about general infrastructure, I think everybody has made that point, that we need it. And then there's the more difficult issues of how we leverage the capacity to maximize it, but also to break the cycles, to be inclusive about it. And that's what Diana was talking about, right? Earlier about, somebody put in the chat, very nice comment, about internet connectivity is no longer a luxury. And so it's a national disaster if we don't get that stuff right. But even if we do, that's not necessarily going to make it inclusive and leverage the potential of our society. So that's the harder end of this discussion. Let me just refer back then to one other point. Diana, do you want to come in quickly, because you put a point in the chat and maybe you just want to follow it up?
Not really. I was answering to Professor Kamginia. She had talked about cyber insecurity, and we had not touched that one. That's why I had to put that comment there. Thank you. Back to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. So there is that discussion going on in the chat then about the about internet security. There was another a comment about the DRC and about the, I think government incentive is very important. Maybe please come in and just make that point and push it a little bit for us.
Okay, thank you for the. I think the government incentive is very important in the sense of, for example, the last time that government of DRC has announced, for example, the connection with the internet in the public universities, it was 2021. And before that, it was not being so. I think if, for example, African population is young, almost young, 60% of the population is at the schooling age. So if we could, for example, target schools or universities with connection with internet, for example, giving this opportunity so that young people should get used to the internet. I think this could reduce the gap, or I think this, but the incentive of government should be. Some countries have come up with, but some countries have not done so. For example, if I say, for example, Kenya or South Africa or Ghana, they have been connecting, for example, with public universities or schools. But in Congo, for example, if you can do, let me say, for example, an application to a public university online, they cannot answer you. They cannot read because they are not connected unless somebody buy the bundle on his phone by his own money. So I think the government incentive should be in Africa. We should tell governments that it's very important to connect with internet, I think.
Thank you. In every aspect of society, that's really the point that you're making. In school and everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, Boniface, why don't you come in and you put a nice point in the chat. Please just come in on that point.
Thank you. The point I was trying to drive on, it's like trying to find out the adequate dosage between infrastructure for connectivity that was raised by Professor Kamia and other speakers. The issue of ICT skill development, which was raised by Elian as one of the main policy routes. The idea of cooperation between the public and the private sector, which was raised by Yusuf, as per those who own the technology and investment mechanism on it. This builds up to an issue which is necessary, which is that of the digital ecosystem. And this was first flagged in an international conference where the digital ecosystem, which brings together issues of hard and soft infrastructure being what was earlier raised as per building the infrastructure, but also affordability, which entails not only the hard infrastructure, but the equipment and tools which individuals use to connect, for which vulnerable groups like women disabled, ethnic minorities, underserved individuals tend to have low equipped digital tools, tend to have low access in terms of network as 4G as mentioned by data, which raises the question of opportunities, that of drawing adequate opportunities linked with the digital evolution. And this should then necessitate an appropriate ecosystem which adequately balances power between the public and the private sector, which should be based on the idea of cooperation. Flagging one last point in this ecosystem, which Professor Kamja still raised, was that of internet security. And I think Ellen mentioned an OECD report, which was on national digital strategies. And amongst the 4 pillars, which were namely extending the network and digital access to rural areas, promoting access and affordability, boosting availability and promotion of certain services linked to the digital, for instance, mobile money or e-banking, especially for women at disadvantage, and online safety, were amongst one of the key pillars for a possible national digital strategy. But the ecosystem must be built in such a way that there are no overlapping actions or overlapping requirements where each actor acts as cooperation for us to further enhance the benefits, that's the net benefit gained from the digital economy. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. We've got about 5 more minutes left for this general discussion. Please, there's so many people, and we really do appreciate the participation in this in our dialogue here this afternoon. So please, others who haven't spoken, come in and please make a crisp point, even if it's just tabling it for consideration. Like a case study. Yes, please, John.
There's John. Yeah, I put a point there. My understanding of infrastructure, and which I think is a moot point, is that we are not just talking about physical infrastructure as a barrier. We also have the question of software, which is proprietary. People, use Windows almost all their lives. And this morning I was watching a documentary here. Why are governments, for example, not adopting open source? Because the cost of software is still a barrier in itself. So to the panelists, do you think open source could help us make some steps towards achieving this infrastructure gap that we have in Africa? So that's my point.
Okay, so the possibilities of open source. Thank you very much. I'm going to leave that and get back to the panelists just now. Is there anybody else who would like to table a point? So I see Pierre has a comment in here, but I also wanted to just ask if anybody has an example of a really effective public-private partnership initiative that they've seen in their country or elsewhere in the world that is focused on this digital divide. Maybe they could just flag it for us and explain it as a very nice way to draw to an end this discussion. So think about that while Pierre takes the floor.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. No, I just wanted, I think, Joseph, I completely agree with Joseph about the importance of infrastructure, the demand side, the supply side, the inequality, retention of human capital, and so on. But what about, is there sufficient financial capital available to finance these projects? Because many things have to be financed: infrastructure, education, demand, social security. So that is a bit the problem. How do you choose among all these different projects?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think Gunnar will come back to that, I'm sure, in his closing remarks, because it's at the core of what we're about here, really. And okay, I seem to have lost my, sorry. So John, you just spoke, right? Who else? Final comment from the floor? That positive example I was asking for, some policy that you've really seen tested or in some context? Would be nice.
Sorry, I have an example, but this is from Latin America. I don't know if it fits.
That's okay. This is the global south.
Okay, okay. It is the one child per, well, one laptop per child program in Uruguay. You know, this idea of Uruguay is a really small country, but anyway, used to have huge divides between the city of Montevideo, the big city, and the rural areas. And so they start with a very challenging plan of extending infrastructure first, and then giving devices to each family, to each person. And then you can see, even during the pandemics, it was really important, because it was a way of continuing, schooling activities and so on. And in a way, they didn't know how to develop the technology. And also they need money in order to do that. So they bring venture capital from the US. They go to the UN, try to get more, funding. So they come up with a portfolio, of money from different sources. Then they engage with private companies and also with a big public company working on telcos, and they create this program. So I think that there are examples out there. We need to think how to import these examples. It's not that easy,
Exactly. A great comment. And we'll be back to you just now for some closing reflections as well. Bernadette, I'm going to give the floor to you for a minute, please.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't have an example, but I have a suggestion to make to the ED on so much has been said about digitalization. So I'm asking myself, is it a way for AERC to introduce some courses on economics of digitalization? To think about that. From day 1 to day 3, we have been talking about that. How about some, training on economics of digitalization? Thank you very much.
A great question for AERC. So
that is interesting, Chair, and I think Bernadette knows that we run some courses on research methods. If you want to use digitalization as a tool, as an instrument for research, that would be fantastic. But right now we are using it for communication. You can see that we have a digital platform here. So it's a diverse, perhaps, areas that we didn't need to cover. Something to think about.
No, exactly. Very nice input. Bernadette, you want to give us your nice example?
I don't, the example that I have is similar to what Ramiro talked about, but especially for women in Cote d'Ivoire.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
So
thank you. So you're giving some support to that case, that example, as something that would really make a difference in the trenches of people's livelihoods.
That's a good way.
Thank you. One final comment then, a brief please from Bernhilde.
Oh, thank you very much for the opportunity. I wanted to give an example of the private-public partnership here in my country, Zimbabwe, where we used to have this private company called Econet. It was giving people or university students some tablets. And the challenge was basically on the funding part and maintenance of those. And most of the students in the universities, they come from rural areas. Once they're out there, now access, because we do not have enough of those boosters to allow for connectivity. But it was there and it was a very good project. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that's a lovely point at which to draw the general discussion to a close. And then we've given rich material, but no pressure, Professor Albrew, who's really from our who's from the partner on this whole engagement and all the dialogues. And so really, without further ado, I'm just going to turn over to you and ask you for some closing thoughts. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Professor Lebrand, for this introduction. And really, I think that this table, but also the previous tables, were fascinating in a way. Of course, I'm going to try to summarize some of the things I learned, but I'm an outsider. So just take it as you know, as how your contribution are feeding our global project, you know, our global view on the future of work. So just take it as my first impressions on 3 days of a lot of information and ideas and data also, and papers, I mean, just flowing in, you know. So first, let me just recap or make a little reminder of our project. We are, I'm leading this project called the Future of Work in the Global South. This is a project that is trying to bring new data, new knowledge, new expertise, new policy frameworks about the future of work through our lens of the Global South. And I've been leading this project for the last 3 years, maybe. And we have been doing a lot of research, basically. I mean, papers on the platform economy, on automation, then on COVID, well, labor markets, so on. But we realized that in a way we were missing the big discussion, you know. We were just engaging in writing new papers, a new piece of research that was totally fine. But in a way we say, well, what about the answers? Are these the right answers to our problems? You know, are we answering the real pieces of knowledge that governments need for a better future of work in our countries? These type of questions, you know. As you all know, when we are writing papers, we are not, we don't do this type of questions. But as in this project, in a way, I must engage. I must try to follow this direction of trying to see the big picture, and there we found some disconnection between the global discussions on the future of work and the real challenges of the future of work, because the real challenges about the future of work are in the global south, where we are going to be creating new entrants into the global labor force for the next 3 years. So in a way, this disconnection made us move our projects toward trying to engage in this type of collective thinking exercises. You know, in each region, we have one there in Sub-Saharan Africa, one in Asia, one in the Middle East, one in Latin America, when we are trying to bring experts, but not to present papers, but to say, what do we know? Which are the answers? Which are the questions? So that was the idea, and of course it's not easy to talk about the so broader, you know, this broad agenda, because we need to talk about skills, about technology, about labor market institutions, about demographics, about inequality, about everything else. So in a way, our idea is that each of you, the experts, are kind of neurons, and we are trying to connect you, you know, in these collective thinking exercises. So really, it was really very interesting to hear you all these days, because even if you were part of one round dialogue, you were talking about the whole problem. If you talk about skills, you are talking about technology, you are talking about infrastructure. If you talk about inequality, you are talking about, at the end of the day, private-public partnerships. So it's all connected, and so that was the whole idea. Now, let me close with some of my lessons from these days, but again, as an outsider. First, I think that this idea that the future of the global labor market is the future of the global South is particularly true in the case of Sub-Saharan Africa. So in the global arena, we need more voices from Sub-Saharan Africa about the future of work, because otherwise we will just talking about aging population problems, aging societies, and we need to talk about job creation. It's totally fine if we want to talk about universal basic income and the sustainability of social protection. That's totally fine, but maybe this is important if it can inform job creation for the next decades. That's my point of view. And if you take this position of trying to start with your demographics, just put it simply, you will come up with different discussions. For example, the quality-quantity trade-off in human capital investment, for example. That's something for a really young society, this type of discussions. Or maybe more important, who is going to demand these jobs? So in a way, you will come up with an idea of that the future of work in Africa is about matching the demographic transition with structural transformation. In a way, thinking about dynamic sectors and what are the good jobs? How can we foster these good jobs? Now, so again, I think that job creation as a north, in a way, is my first conclusion. And the second is that for trying to manufacture this future, to create this future with a lot of good jobs in Sub-Saharan Africa, you need to address different issues, but all together, right? Technological change, skills development, working conditions, and inclusive structural change. Regarding the first one, technological change, I think that we have a very interesting discussion the first day. I'm going to brief it in 4 lessons. First, Africa needs more digital capital, more infrastructure, more finance. Second, there are leapfrogging opportunities, but again, I see this advantage of backwardness as an indication that we have failed in the past, and just that maybe it's not it's just a way to think that you need to do things differently in the future, right? The third conclusion is that we need to think technology for whom. We need to engage in technology choices. We need to support existing infrastructure. We need to move away from agriculture, but we need to think about the industrialization. Well, the answers are no in what I heard from Sub-Saharan Africa. We need to support agriculture. We need to think about embracing, in a way, manufacturing will be part of the solution, another problem. And of course, we need to let the diaspora and high-skilled workers just to go outside and get money and for our countries. And the fourth is that, and this is a conclusion that also appears in different round dialogues, is that more capital is not the same as more productivity. Access versus use. I mean, this, in a way, you need the capital, the digital capital, but then for what? Then you need to have businesses, you need to have ideas, you need to have plans. Even you need to direct technology. Remember that technological innovations are created only for the one who can pay, because that's how it works. So how to make it inclusive for those who are in the global margin of the digital economy or outside this margin. So there's a lot to do, and maybe just with adding more digital capital, more infrastructure, maybe that's just one step, one part of a long chain, of policies. Then regarding skills, I think that the main message is that the status quo is not an option. I mean, if we want to match this demographic transition with structural transformation, I think that we have a lot of disinvestment in key skills. We have misinvestment. I mean, we are investing in some skills that maybe are for the for the 19th century or for the 20th century. And we have a lot of inequality in the education system. And again, the issue of access against use. Maybe more schooling is not the same as more learning. So we need to work on performance. And regarding skills, also, it emerged the idea of a low government capacity to innovate, to think differently, to try to move to more flexible solutions, to embrace technology, to teach, and so on. Regarding working conditions, we have this discussion about, well, technology can help because we can get some form of informality in our underground economy, but also it was we engaged in a very interesting discussion about formality and informality as an equilibrium. It's not that easy to say, okay, we need to move just all formal jobs. Well, no, I mean, in a way it works. And so we need to move smoothly in a way, trying to understand the incentives, the needs, and the complementarity factors or roles of formals and informals. So it was a very interesting discussion. Finally, about how to make it inclusive, I think that we talk a lot. I think that this is a main issue in a way, as if you look at, for example, South Africa as a leading country, if you look at this increasing wage inequality, in a way, it's not about hollowing out, but it's more about the cream, the high skilled workers, maybe in these countries, just competing in the global market. So I think that this is going to happen. So I think that the main problem is less about remaining that a country or a whole region being out of the foreign revolution, but just how to make it inclusive. So I think that this discussion of what to do to engage the participation of women, on youth, and also racial issues, I think that they're really important. And I will add to this the issue of intertemporal fairness, and so also I will discuss children, and those to be born into the discussion, because I think that is important. And finally, one cross-cutting issue was this idea of what to do with the public sector. I mean, how to change, how to reform the public sector in order to be able to direct this change, right? I think that there's a kind of complexity there, because we need risk-taking entrepreneurs. So we need innovation. And in order to do that, to engage innovation, we need to have space for private enterprise, for movements. But also we need the government to provide public goods. And also we need the government to direct. I mean, it's not only important the rate of innovation, but also the direction in order to make it inclusive. So how can we engage in a new social contract between the government and the private sector, saying, here we have a window of opportunity, and you need to remember that if we don't do this, we will have a big youth bulge, maybe, biggest ever, maybe, in the next 3 or 4 decades. So I'm going to stop there. I'm just going to say thank you. Thanks for the organizer. Thanks to all of you, the participants. I think that we really learned a lot. And thanks, Catherine, Theo, Shoshuna, and everyone. And now I think that I will give the floor to Shoshuna, I think, for the final remarks. Thanks again.
Thank you very much, Ramiro. This is actually very exciting. Today I have been into so many platforms discussing so much of research. But what has really given me one of the biggest headache is technology. And it is not availability of it, but actually unreliability of it. Right now, I think I have, in the last 1 hour, I have had five power outages, and they started in the morning. So if you feel that if I don't finish my speech, you know that it is a power outage, and it is taking like close to 2 minutes to get back. So I have suffered. That's why somebody said it is not a lot of, it's not technology, it's not the physical infrastructure, it's actually even the reliability of that. That's one aspect. The second aspect is that I think we have looked at so many issues. In fact, the previous session I was in was talking about research. And I argued that you need research to provide instruments and even tools for the policy regime. Because you cannot actually say that they don't read research. I think we know that this is what is really needed. But the most important thing is that I think the summary that is coming out from the discussions I listened to in the last 3 days is that Africa is actually stagnating because it is captured in a situation where it has raw capital accumulation, and then it has massive coordination failures. And then the entry of technology allows us to change all that, but we require a lot of thinking around it. In ARC, we have had a lot of research in terms of youth employment, for example. And we come up even dealing with the global value chain. And in fact, we initiated a new project on global value chain on Monday. And the global value chain, if you look at sectors that actually contribute to a lot of value addition, actually are low-key sectors and services. And that's why, again, dividing the path of Africa's development, so many people have come up with so many justification. Remember, we have a big project that has been going on industries without smokestacks, because everybody believes that we should follow the European model of actually value addition moving from agriculture to manufacturing. But actually, we don't have that. Perhaps we may want to ask ourselves whenever we start the Global South work, is Africa going to chart its own path of development? And that's a point that I made yesterday and perhaps the previous day. But now I wasn't supposed to ignite the debate that we have covered for almost 3 days. I think I was given the respect to actually provide closing remarks. And for me, this is very important in terms of the dialogue that we have had for 3 days on the future of work in Global South, with an acronym we have to learn how to deal with for Sub-Saharan Africa. I appreciate CPEC for giving ARC an opportunity to jointly co-host the roundtable of future work in Global South for Sub-Saharan Africa. Let me also say that I'm very, very happy about, and I really need to thank the moderators for ensuring the roundtable panelists and participants were well engaged in constructive and open dialogue throughout 3 days. And we believe that we can carry a lot of that into our research and policy advisory. The research that we would like to adapt is the research that is needed in the region, which we believe is going to be very, very important to incite or to ignite policy regime changes. The policy regime changes. We need to go into a different policy regime changes if we are going to support the kind of, or if we are going to resolve the kind of constraints that we have and challenges. Panelists also were very important in accelerating, in accepting, they accepted the invitation and they took their time to prepare for the presentation. And that is what defines the success in a dialogue like that, the one we have had. They provided and engaged in constructive and open exchanges throughout the 3 days. And I'm very, very happy about that. Most of them are also coming from our resource person database, others are our researchers, and we are very happy about that. So for me, when I listened to so many of the discussions and roundtable dialogues, I thought that they provided an opportunity for experts in the fields that we cover, to share and deliberate on existing knowledge, and how to generate new knowledge and new ways of sharing that knowledge, and of course share the experiences and what we might think we can push forward in terms of policy initiatives for the future interventions that we believe are very, very important. Our distinguished guests, thank you very much, and the participants for their participation and input. A lot of ground has been covered in 5 roundtables over the last 3 days. And the work for Global South, for Sub-Saharan Africa agenda, has helped us to, will help us to shape some of the issues and even the perspectives in terms of how we're going to deliberate on them. But I think it has been exciting for new technological development because everybody has come back to the new technological development and how we really need to deal with it. That's why Bernadette actually said that we need a course on digitalization. I do know that it's something that is important in ways. But what are the takeaways? One, the future of work is influenced by factors that are interactive. We have talked about globalization. We have talked about skills development and even the required skills. We have talked about the technology, and we also have talked about demographic change and even the labor market institutions. All these are interacting. What we are looking at is perhaps the emerging and what is emerging from the existing research and knowledge is that there's a lot of work yet to be covered to realize the opportunities that will emerge in the future of work in Sub-Saharan Africa. We need stronger participation across all those areas, those factors that were covered, because they are going to provide us with inputs in terms of how we deal with it. We need stronger participation by our stakeholders in developing innovative ways of using digital technology to improve productivity. I think yesterday I enjoyed very much in that roundtable on digital technology, because essentially it improves productivity, it improves how we work. And that's why it is also now possible that even with lockdowns and pandemic, we still manage to continue with our work, policy dialogues, and even training capabilities and even research, so that they are not disrupted and they are going to, so that they don't even, they are not going to affect human capital in future that is needed to coordinate all these. The rapid development of artificial intelligence and machine learning is already disrupting our notions of work and education. And artificial intelligence grows more powerful. As artificial intelligence grows more powerful, it will dramatically change the skills employers seek and employees need. That is why, again, we have to go back and ask ourselves, how do we ignite these kind of training capabilities for those who have left school? How do we perhaps raise the profile of training in terms of those who are already there, so that we use the technology to actually help us in terms of efficiency and productivity? Much of the research and policy interventions in future work centers around the need to push for a policy shift in early childhood and higher education in order to better match the skills of graduates with demands of an artificial intelligence driven marketplace. Markets are changing. And even now, when we are asked about what will happen with the resolution of pandemic, we actually stop the post-COVID economic recovery strategy. The first thing we rush to is first human capital, and the second one is markets. So you can imagine how important this is to us in terms of research, in terms of skills. That is very, very important for us in terms of the marketplace. While that is certainly important, we really focus on the more vital change we need to make, the critical connection between early childhood and education today and the future. And that was, yesterday was covered very well. The discussions with Louise Fox was very exciting. But I do believe that there are some problems, and some of these problems are actually the initial conditions that are becoming inhibitive. We need to come up with a mechanism to dislodge these initial conditions from affecting the future and continuing to affect the future. And that for me is very, very important. And that's why technological adoption requires that, and upgrading skills is also very important. And I think every time I turn to politicians, they talk about the current education curricula needs to conform. But I think we should look at it from an endogenous growth or endogenous development point of view. But I do believe it's going to work. And that will help us in terms of pushing the working age population to rise up to the opportunities that are available, to capture, and that will help us capture the demographic dividend for which education outcomes need to be improved. And that for me is very, very important. Of course, there are so many takeaways and one cannot summarize them in a day. But I think what I want to focus on is the takeaway on emerging opportunities for Sub-Saharan Africa. We just don't want to push the work in Global South if it is not helping us in terms of capturing the emerging opportunities. Sub-Saharan Africa has become more integrated with the rest of the world and with itself, but it still lags in other regions in terms of interregional. One of them is the physical infrastructure that has been mentioned. The other one is complementarity of trade, which is actually lacking. We tend to produce the same products so that we tend to compete with each other. But also COVID-19 has speeded up the adoption of digital technologies. And it means that we have leapfrogged by several years. Companies have accelerated digitization, their customers. Today in Kenya, if there are areas that you go, you cannot use cash. There are also areas that you may not even find it attractive even to visit a bank. There are areas that they will just tell you to use your phone to pay because they don't even have to touch cash. So there's so many things that we have seen the COVID-19 has given us some challenges, but also some opportunities. That is why we are even able now to talk to each other without actually any disruption except for power outages, even though we cannot travel and meet. Like I would have liked everyone we meet here in Nairobi or in another city like Johannesburg in Africa, but we couldn't do that. But because we couldn't do that, we did not say let's wait until we can travel. No, the most important thing is it has been possible because of technology. And of course, that gives us a chance that if we have to, of course, take advantage of that, the future work in Sub-Saharan Africa requires significant reskilling and upskilling. I've listened to discussions that have poured and dialogues across panels. They pointed out to the need of enhanced human skills, such as creativity. That will give us room for creativity, originality, initiative, critical thinking. And of course, if you go to trade, there will be negotiations. There are so many of those. So it means that we need human reskilling and upskilling so that we have flexibility in terms of the innovation to cope with the space and the demands that are required in that space. So for me, that is very, very important so that we'll focus on how we can equip young people with fundamental skills that will stand them good, in a good stance in terms of the competition available for the available jobs, but also innovatively look for even entrepreneurship that will also enrich the space. For me, that is very, very critical. In terms of conclusions and the way forward, indeed, research findings are shaping an important dialogue and putting tools that offer options for policy making that Sub-Saharan Africa can use and advance in its contribution in the future of work. Today, I was in a session where they were talking about decolonizing even research, decolonizing even foods. And the whole idea is that you have to look at the diversity of available tools, the diversity of delivery modalities in various ways. And this is what we really mean in terms of taking advantage and the way forward for the future, or that will shape our research capabilities. And that is going to help us in terms of strengthening the institutions that can actually provide a better coordination. Why everybody complains about infrastructure is because there is a coordination failure. The emerging need for the ARC to initiate training on the economics of digitization that has been mentioned. For me, I like that so quite a lot. But the most important thing is it's what you can do with the digital platforms that are available and how you can actually increase the knowledge to actually reorient them and suppose and situate them in a way that they are going to help you in the workspace. This is going to be very, very important. We have to be trained to work with Zoom, for example. Right now, we are using even other platforms that are helping us manage board meetings. And inside there, you have files for the board meeting. You can recall what did we say in the previous board meeting. So you can imagine things are changing. They're helping us actually work. And it means that the future of work is such that we may have to just sit in the office and talk to each other across the continents, different continents, bring us together. And that is going to reduce travel, but it is going to improve productivity and all. CPEC and ARC, we look forward to sharing the chapter on the roundtables and on the next set of actions. I do believe we have covered a lot in these 3 days. I think, but even if we have covered a lot, we still need to really think about our preparedness of transition between education and labor markets, because so many issues came up that are very important. There are of technical vocational education technology that will emphasize the skills that are required in the digital space, as well as higher learning that is very important for us to add to the capacity in policy making. And finally, curricular development that embrace the future work. For us at the ARC in our graduate program, they actually developed the curricula that is going to be taught for economics in public universities. We want to help them mount quality degree programs. It means that we will also continuously revise the curriculum. Right now, we have revised the curricula to cover the online material, the online platform. But we'll continue doing this depending very much on the endogenous demands of the labor market. And that is why I look forward to us working together with the CPEC, as well as our resource persons and people from the global south. That includes Uruguay, my friend. I used to come to Uruguay when I was working for IDRC, and I even came in and we started the Latin American Trade Research Network. I ushered that way back in 2002. So you can imagine I'm familiar with the regions. But the beauty about it is that what are the demands in terms of the kind of capacity we require? We do know what is going on, but we have the capacity to set it right and to move it in an area where it will be igniting and incentivizing everyone to join in. So thank you very much for that. And thank you for being there. And we will now define the future work together with the CPEC so that all our researchers remain engaged. Thank you very much and good evening from Nairobi.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, panelists.
That was great, Mure. And Theo, thank you very much for the hard work you have put in with your team to make sure that it works. Thank you, my network colleagues, Bernadette, Victor. There's so many. There's so many. And my colleagues here. So we continue with research and create that platform in research in the ARC, and working together with CPEC, we're going to get a lot going.
Thank you. Thank you. You are the one who pushed for it, eh, Juguna? Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you guys very, very much for all the hard work. It was so lovely working with you. Cheers.
So thank you very much, guys. See you and bye for now.
Thank you, Joseph. Thank you so much.
And cheers.
The Theophile, do take care.
Thank you.
So, thank you, Theo.
We will have a meeting around the chapter, okay?
Yeah, so we will be setting up that meeting here.
Yeah,
so,
we'll let you know.
So do you have like a timeline? I don't know.
Not yet, but we will send you a message.
Okay, yeah, so
Okay.
that's good, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, but
thank
me
you.
and Victor will meet as soon. We'll exchange email messages, yeah?
Okay,
And set up
okay.
a meeting.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, yes,
All right,
yes.
thank you. All right.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Thompson. Thank you very much.
All right, take care,
All right,
Tom.
thank you very much. So we'll be in touch, okay? Thanks, Jaguna. Yeah.
So Victor and Tom will be sending you the recording.
Yes,
Okay, yeah, so yeah,
Yes,
recordings we need,
Yeah.
yeah.
Sorry, can you say that?
So we need that, I've taken detail, but
Yes.
recordings will really help us, yeah. We already have some, yeah.
They would.
Okay, yeah.
Kwan,
That's good. Okay, yeah.
is there also a heat wave in Ontario, or it's only in some parts of Canada?
Oh, it's just in British Columbia. Yeah, yeah, we're okay here. It's hot, but it's manageable. And of course, I can't complain of the heat. Sometimes I see people complaining. It's okay for me. It's better. Yeah.
You can adapt to it.
Oh, no problem for me.
Okay, bye-bye.
Okay, bye. Have a good
All right.
sleep. All right. Yeah.